Hello, my true crime fanatics. How are we doing this fabulous Sunday? Oh my gosh. I have quite the true crime for you today. I found this in one of my research lists, if you like. I do a lot of research, so I found this, and I was skimming through, and I thought, how have I come across this case? Because it's a little bit different, a little bit who done it, who's telling the truth. It's one of those cases, and yeah, I must have seen it on TV, because I remember watching it, and I thought, interesting. Okay, this is interesting. We all garner inspiration from everywhere, okay? So I don't know if you've heard of this. I don't know if you've heard of this case before, but we're talking about Jeffery MacDonald. Jeffery MacDonald. I'm just going to call him Jeffrey, okay? I'm just going to call him Jeffrey because that is his name. But yeah, usually with a despicable human, I like last week, Vass, he wasn't worthy of his first name. But this one is a little bit complicated. It is a little bit complicated. First of all, let me get introductions out of the way. I am Cindy, aka Time Painting Fanatics. Just in case you don't know, I am working on, it's either Colourful Dragons or Playful Dragons. I'm going to go with Playful Dragons because they're playful, right? This is by DP with Sparklers, aka Timor. So I'm going to be working on this while chatting to you about my true crime that I have stumbled upon. Now Jeffrey has always maintained his innocence, okay? So I'm going to leave it open to the grand jury here on YouTube. Did he do it or did he not do it? Okay. This is at the centre of it is a very tragic case. It's a very tragic case. But as always, this murder case remains one of the most litigated murder cases in American criminal history. Okay, so as always, I want to delve into his background. Let's kind of suss Jeffrey out, because we don't know if he did commit murder or he did not commit murder. You're going to have to decide, and you're going to have to let me know in the comment section. Okay, are we ready? Okay, let's get to it. So, Jeffery MacDonald was born in Jamaica, in Queens, New York. Not Jamaica, Jamaica. He was the second of 3 children, and his dad's name was Robert, and his mum's name was Dorothy. He was raised in a poor household in the most magical place on earth, apparently, Long Island. It's a wrestling thing. Okay, sorry, let's get let's get serious. Okay, so he grew up. He was raised in a poor household on Long Island with a disciplinarian father. Now, although he wasn't violent towards his wife and children, but he did demand obedience and achievement from his family. Jeffrey attended high school, where he became the president of the student council, and he was voted the most popular and most likely to succeed by his fellow students. And of course, he was king at his senior prom. Towards the end of his 8th grade year, Jeffrey became acquainted with Colette Catherine Stevenson. He would later recollect that he had first observed Colette walking down the hallway with her best friend, and although he was attracted to both girls, it was Colette that caught his eye. Approximately 2 weeks later, they began talking and they formed a friendship, and Jeffrey soon asked her out to the movies, and the two formed a brief romantic relationship in the 9th grade, with Jeffrey later saying that they fell in love when holding hands on a balcony while watching a movie, A Summer Place, at the Rialto Theatre. He would later reminisce that whenever he or Colette heard the song theme from A Summer Place across the airwaves, they would turn up the radio. I think we all do that. I think if there's a song that reminds you of a special someone, we let them know. It's easier these days than it is these days, but I think we all whack up the volume, like reminiscing in that memory for a minute. The following summer, while visiting a friend on Fire Island, Colette announced to Jeffrey that their relationship was over, and he then went on to form a relationship with a girl named Penny Wells. Jeffrey's high school grades were sufficient for him to earn a 3-year scholarship at Princeton University, where he enrolled as a pre-medical student in 1962. By the second year of his studies, Jeffrey and Penny Wells had separated, and he went back and resumed his romantic relationship with Colette, the first girl he saw in the hallway. Then, a freshman at Skidmore College, he would later remember Colette had grown into a shy young woman with a, quote, slight fear of the world in general, end quote, who would rely on his own self-confidence. Jeremy found her shyness touching and gradually viewed himself as her protector, in addition to being her boyfriend. It would be a bit weird if they were not dating, right? The two regularly exchanged letters and would frequently hitchhike to Skidmore College to be in her company at the weekends. Although Jeffrey was dating other women at the time, he resolved to marry Colette upon learning she was pregnant with his child in August 1963. She in turn left college to raise their child. With the consent of Colette's family, the two married on September the 14th in New York City. 100 people attended the service, with the reception held at the Fifth Avenue Hotel. The couple honeymooned at Cape Cod. Their first daughter, Kimberly Catherine, was born April the 18th in 1964. After his undergraduate work at Princeton, Jeffrey briefly worked as a construction supervisor before he moved with his wife and child to Chicago in the summer of 1965, where he had been accepted at Northwestern University Medical School. The couple moved into a small one-bedroom apartment, with Colette committed to maintaining the household and raising their daughter as Jeffrey focused on his studies, while also working a series of part-time jobs to assist with family finances. The following year, the family relocated to a middle-class neighborhood, where their second child, Kristen Jean, was born on the 8th of May in 1967. Shortly after, Jeffrey graduated from medical school in 1968. He and his family relocated to New Jersey as he completed a one-year internship at a Columbia Medical Center in New York. He specialized in thorax, which is the chest, so like the rib cage, the lungs, the heart, as well as, other vital stuff. He specialized in that kind of surgery. Jeffrey later described his internship year as, quote, a horrendous year for both himself and Colette, adding he frequently worked 36 hours with only 12 hours at home. Consequently, when at home, he was frequently exhausted and had limited interaction with his wife and his daughters. At the completion of his internship, they vacationed in Aruba before Jeffrey joined the army. Jeffrey was commissioned in the United States Army on June 28th in 1969, and he was sent to Fort Sam Houston in Texas to undergo a 6 weeks basic training course. While at Fort Sam, he volunteered to be assigned to the Army's Special Forces, known as Green Berets, to become a Special Force doctor. In late August, Jeffrey reported to the 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Liberty, then known as Fort Bragg, in North Carolina, to serve as the group's surgeon. He was joined by his wife and his children, and Jeffrey resided at 544 Castle Drive in a section of the base reserved for married officers and afforded security by military police. The couple quickly became popular among their neighbours, although Jeffrey and Colette are known to have argued occasionally. By the time the MacDonalds moved into their new apartment at Fort Bragg, Colette had acquired 2 years of studies with aspirations to obtain a bachelor's degree in English literature and teach part-time. Both daughters had developed distinctive personalities. Kimberly had markedly feminine, intelligent and shy. Kristen, a boisterous tomboy who would run over and crack someone if she observed her older sister being bullied by other children. On December 10th, the 3rd Special Forces Group was deactivated and Jeffrey was transferred on base to headquarters to serve as a preventive medical officer. Shortly before Christmas in 1969, with his wife approximately 3 months pregnant with their 3rd child and their first son, Jeffrey bought his daughters a Shetland pony, anticipating the family would soon relocate to a farm in Connecticut. He kept this purchase a secret from his wife and children, and he and his stepfather-in-law drove them to the stable as a surprise on Christmas Day. His daughters chose to name the pony Trooper. The same month, Colette is known to have penned a letter to college acquaintances in which she described her life as, quote, never being so normal or happy, adding that she and her husband were content and that their baby son was due to be born in July and their family would be complete. By 1970, Jeffrey had earned the rank of captain and was planning to study advanced medical training at Yale University upon completing his tour of duty as a Green Beret doctor. On the afternoon of February the 16th, Jeffrey took his daughters to feed and ride the Christmas pony that he had bought them. The trio returned home at around 5:45 p.m. Jeffrey then showered, changed into an old pair of blue pyjamas. After the family ate supper, Colette left the household to attend an evening teaching class at Fort Bragg's North Carolina University. According to Jeffrey, he played horsey, allowing his daughters to ride upon his back as if he was their Shetland pony for a short while before he had put Kristen to bed at approximately 7 p.m. As Kimberly, the older daughter, Kimberly played a game on the coffee table. He then slept for an hour before watching Kimberly's favourite TV show with her, before his older daughter also went to bed. Colette returned home at 9:40 p.m. and the couple sat on the couch watching TV together before Colette decided to go to bed, and Jeffrey had fallen asleep on the sofa in the living room in the early hours of the morning the following day. At 3:42 a.m. on February the 17th in 1970, dispatchers at Fort Bragg received an emergency phone call from Jeffrey, who faintly spoke into the receiver. Quote, "Help! 544 Castle Drive, stabbing. 544 Castle Drive, stabbing. Hurry!" The operator then heard the sound of the receiver clatter against a wall or a floor. Within 10 minutes, responding military police had arrived at the address, initially believing they were responding to a domestic disturbance. They found the front door closed and locked, and the house dark inside. When no one answered the door, they circled to the back of the house, where a police sergeant discovered the back screen door closed and unlocked, and the back door wide open. Upon entering, the sergeant walked into the master bedroom before running to the front of the house, shouting, "Tell them to get Womack ASAP." Colette MacDonald was discovered sprawled on the floor of the master bedroom. She lay on her back with one eye open and one breast exposed. She had been repeatedly clubbed about her body, with both her forearms later found to be broken. The pathologist would note these wounds had likely been inflicted as Colette had raised her arms to protect her face. In addition, she had been stabbed 21 times in the chest with an ice pick and 16 times around the neck and chest with a knife, with her throat severed in 2 places. A bloodied and torn pajama top was draped upon her chest, and a paring knife lay beside her body. Beside her, Jeffery MacDonald was found lying face down, alive but wounded, with his head on Colette's chest and one arm around her neck. As military personnel approached, he whispered, "Check my kids. I heard my kids crying." 5-year-old Kimberly was found in her bed, having been repeatedly bludgeoned. Again, she was stabbed in the neck between 8 and 10 times. She lay on her left side. She had a fractured skull from at least 2 blows to the right side of her head, and one wound to her face had caused her cheekbone to protrude through her skin. The wounds inflicted to Kimberly's head were sufficiently severe in nature to have caused bruising to her brain. Death soon after. She died pretty quickly, is the message there. Across the hallway, 2-year-old Kristen was found in her own bed, also lying on her left side, with a baby bottle close to her mouth. She had been stabbed 33 times across the chest, neck, hands and back with a knife, and 15 times with an ice pick. 2 knife wounds had penetrated her heart, and the ice pick wounds were noted to be shallow. The injuries to her hands were likely defense wounds. on the headboard of the MacDonald's marital bed, the word pig was written in 8-inch capital letters. The blood used to write this word was later determined to be Colette's. Having received impromptu resuscitation, Jeffrey sat upright, then exclaimed, "Jesus Christ, look at my wife. I'm going to kill those goddamn acid heads." He was immediately taken to nearby Womack Hospital, shouting, "Let me see my kids," as he was carried out of his home on a stretcher. Now, Jeffrey's account of what happened. This is Jeffrey's account of what happened. So he's taken to the hospital, and medical staff discovered the wounds that Jeffrey had suffered were much less numerous and severe as those inflicted upon his wife and children. He had suffered cuts, bruises, and fingernail scratches to his face and chest, although none of these wounds were life-threatening or required stitches. Jeffrey was also found to have a mild concussion. He had also received a single stab wound between 2 ribs on his right side. This wound was described by a staff surgeon as a clean, small, sharp incision, measuring 5/8 of an inch in depth, and it had caused his lung to partially collapse. Jeffrey was released from the hospital after 9 days. Now, when he was questioned by the Criminal Investigation Division, aka the CID, Jeffrey claimed that he, at about 2 a.m. on February the 17th, he had washed the evening's dinner dishes before deciding to go to bed, although because his younger daughter Kristen had wet his side of the bed, he's taken Kristen to her own bed, and not wishing to wake his wife to change the sheets, he had then taken a blanket from Kristen's room and fallen asleep on the living room couch. According to Jeffrey, he was later awakened by Colette and Kimberly's screams, and Colette shouting, "Jeff, Jeff, help, why are they doing this to me?" As he rose from the couch to go to their aid, he was attacked by 3 male intruders, 1 black, 2 white. The shorter of the 2 white men had worn lightweight, possibly surgical gloves, and the 4th intruder he described as a white female with long blonde hair, possibly a wig, and wearing high-heeled, knee-high boots with a white floppy hat partially covering her face. This individual stood nearby holding a lit candle, chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." Jeffrey claimed the 3 males then attacked him with a club and ice pick, with the female intruder shouting, "Hit him again." During the struggle, his pajama top was pulled over his head to his wrists, and he had used this bound garment to ward off thrusts from an ice pick, although eventually he was overcome by his assailants and knocked unconscious in the living room end of the hallway leading to the bedrooms. When he regained consciousness, the intruders had left the house. He then stumbled from room to room, attempting mouth-to-mouth resuscitation upon each of his daughters to no avail, before discovering his wife. He had pulled a small paring knife from her chest, which he then tossed onto the floor, attempted in vain to find her pulse, then draped his pyjama jacket over her body and then phoned for help. Initial investigation. Within minutes of the discoveries at Castle Drive, military police were instructed to check the occupants of all vehicles in and around Fort Bragg, seeking 2 white men, 1 black man, and a white woman with blonde hair and a floppy hat, in an effort to apprehend the 4 intruders Jeffrey alleged had attacked him and his family. Despite these efforts, military police failed to locate the 4 intruders, and the attempt to find them was abandoned by 6 a.m. Shortly after daylight on February the 17th, investigators recovered the murder weapons just outside the back door. These instruments were an old hickory kitchen knife, an ice pick, a 31-inch long piece of lumber with 2 blue threads attached with blood. All 3 were quickly determined to have come from their own house, and all had been wiped clean of fingerprints. Jeffrey later claimed to have never seen these items before. As Army investigators studied the physical evidence, the Army CID quickly came to the disbelief Jeffrey's account, as they found little evidence to support this version of events. Although Jeffrey was trained in unarmed combat, the living room where he had supposedly fought for his life against 3 armed assailants showed few signs of a struggle, apart from a coffee table that had been knocked onto its side, a pile of magazines beneath the edge, and a flower plant that had fallen onto the floor. Questioning of the MacDonald's neighbours revealed they heard no sounds of a struggle or disturbance within the household in the early hours, but had heard Colette shouting in a loud, angry voice. The 16-year-old daughter of these neighbours, who occasionally babysat for the family, informed investigators the 2 had seemed indifferent to each other in the month prior to the murders. By February 23rd, Colonel Robert at Fort Bragg had advised the FBI to discontinue their search for the 4 intruders. In addition to the lack of damage to the inside of the house, no fibres from Jeffrey's torn pyjama top were found in the living room where he claimed the garment had been torn in his struggle with the intruders. However, fibres from the pyjama top were found beneath Colette's body and in the bedroom of both of his daughters. And one fibre from this garment was also found under Kristen's fingernail. A single fragment of skin was recovered from beneath one of Colette's fingernails, although this evidence was later lost. Blood-stained splinters, likely sourcing from the section of lumber recovered close to the back door, were recovered from all 3 bedrooms of the apartment, but not the room where Jeffrey claimed to have been attacked. No blood or fingerprints were found on either telephone that Jeffrey claimed he had used to call for help after checking each member of his family and attempting to resuscitate them. Furthermore, the blood-stained tip of a surgical glove was also found beneath the headboard where the blood inscription was written. This glove was identical in composition to a medical supply Jeffrey kept in the family kitchen. It's not looking good, dude. It's not looking good. Although it had rained that night, and Jeffrey also specifically remembered the female intruder's boots were all wet with rainwater just dripping off them. The sole footprint observed at the scene was a bloody bare footprint located in Kristen's bedroom, leading from the child's bed in the direction of facing the doorway. By mid-March, the CID had obtained the results of the forensic testing. They were testing the blood, hair and fibre samples within 544 Castle Drive. This contradicted Jeffrey's accounts of his movements and further convinced investigators of his guilt. For example, Kimberly's blood was also found on his pyjama top, even though Jeffrey claimed that he had not been wearing this garment while in her room when attempting resuscitation. Jeffrey's own blood was located in significant quantities only in 2 locations: in the front of the kitchen cabinet, obtaining rubber gloves, and upon the right side of a hallway bathroom sink. Investigators also questioned why Colette's blood was found in Kristen's room, although all 3 victims were found in separate rooms, suggesting they had been attacked separately. Moreover, although blood evidence indicated Kimberly had been attacked as she entered the master bedroom, investigators questioned why home intruders would bother to carry her back to her bedroom to continue the attack. 4 members of the MacDonald family had different blood types. That's a statistical anomaly, but that assisted investigators in determining the movements of each member of the household and their subsequent theory as to the likely scenario of how the events occurred. Upon the assumption, the 4 individuals discovered by responding military police where there were only 4 people in the house in the early hours of February the 17th. Investigators were able to reconstruct a likely scenario of the chain of events that unfolded via blood typing and the nature and severity of the wounds discovered upon each individual. So they're doing their homework. They're doing their homework. So their reconstruction, okay, this is their reconstruction of how they think, judging on how the evidence was and everything else. Due to their fact-finding mission, this is their reconstruction of that. An argument or fight between Jeffrey and Colette began in the master bedroom, possibly over the issue of Kristen repeatedly wetting his side of the bed while sleeping there. Or they could have been arguing about his adultery, because, you know, he was doing that at college. He wants to say he was doing it as an adult. Investigators speculated that an argument turned physical and that she probably hit him on the forehead with a hairbrush, which resulted in a mark on his forehead which failed to even break his skin. It was just, you know, yeah. As he retaliated by hitting her, first with his fists, then beating her with a piece of lumber. Kimberly, whose blood was found in the doorway, may have walked in after hearing the commotion and was struck at least once on the head, possibly by accident. Believing that Colette was dead, Jeffrey carried the mortally wounded Kimberly back to her bedroom. After stabbing her, he then proceeded to Kristen's room, carrying the club that he used on Kimberly, intent on disposing of the last remaining potential witness. Before he could do so, Colette, whose blood was found on Kristen's bed covers and on one wall of her room, apparently regained consciousness, stumbled into her younger daughter's bedroom and threw her own body over Kristen in a desperate attempt to protect her. After killing both of them, Jeffrey then wrapped up Colette's body in a sheet, carried it back to the master bedroom, leaving a smudged footprint matching her blood type as he left the room. CID investigators then theorized that Jeffrey attempted to cover up the murders using articles on the Manson family murders that he had recently read in the March 1970 issue of Esquire. Investigators had found in the living room, putting on surgical gloves from a medical supply in the kitchen closet. He went to the master bedroom where he used Colette's blood to write the word pig on the headboard. Jeffrey then laid his torn pajama top over her head and repeatedly stabbed her in the chest with an ice pick, then discarded the weapons close to the back door of the property after wiping them clean of fingerprints. Finally, Jeffrey took a scalpel blade from the supply closet, entered the adjacent bathroom, and stabbed himself once in the chest while standing beside the sink before disposing of the surgical gloves. He had then used the family telephone to summon an ambulance before laying down beside Colette's body as he waited for military police to arrive. Interrogation. On April the 6th, 1970, Army investigators formally cautioned, then interrogated Jeffery MacDonald. he was first offered the chance to recount his version of events and recounted his claims of being attacked by 4 intruders with whom he grappled with before falling to the ground, observing, quote, the top of some boots, and being rendered unconscious before regaining consciousness, experiencing symptoms of a pneumothorax in the hallway after the intruders had left. Investigators were unconvinced of Jeffrey's accounts. Midway through questioning, Jeffrey asked the question about his stab wounds by CID investigator William Ivory. Quote, "You didn't do it yourself, did you?" This question prompted Jeffrey to deny the accusation before referencing his puncture wound and his having to persuade hospital doctors to insert a chest tube into his body as he was sure his lung was punctured. Questioning then focused upon the crime scene and results of the forensic testing. Jeffrey denied any of the murder weapons had originated from his household, despite the fact the section of lumber matched the wood from Kimberly's closet. He also claimed to be unaware of how the fibre and blood evidence contradicted his accounts of his movements and actions. Investigator Robert Shaw then questioned Jeffrey as to the lack of disorder and damage within the household and the lack of any motive. Stating that in the investigator's experience, had 4 intruders embarked on a murderous frenzy within a small household, they would expect to encounter evidence such as busted furniture and broken mirrors and bashed in walls. But the only sign of a struggle were the top-heavy living room coffee table, which had not flipped over all the way in the midst of a struggle, and a flower pot beside the table with a plant upon the carpet and the pot standing upright. Jeffrey was unable to offer a plausible explanation for this observation and also claimed to be unaware of how Kimberly's blood was recovered from the master bedroom. Following a short break, questioning resumed the same afternoon. Investigator Franz Grebner listed further physical discrepancies between Jeffrey's account and the forensic evidence, repeatedly stating all the facts pointed to his having staged the crime scene. Jeffrey was unable to offer a plausible explanation to this questioning before abruptly accusing Grebner of having, quote, run out of ideas and attempting to frame him to maintain a 100% solved homicide rate. In response, Grebner stated, quote, "We have all this business here that would tend to indicate that you were involved in this rather than people who came in from the outside and picked 544 Castle Drive and went up there and were lucky enough to find your door open," end quote. Investigators asked Jeffrey to submit to a polygraph test to verify his accounts. He readily agreed, although within 10 minutes of the conclusion of the interview, he called investigators to state he'd changed his mind and would not submit to any polygraph testing. On the evening of April 6th, Jeffery MacDonald was relieved of his duties and placed under restriction pending further inquiries. The following day, he was assigned an army lawyer. At the recommendation of his mother on April 10th, he instead hired a flamboyant civilian defense attorney, Bernard Siegel, to defend him. Less than a month later, on May the 1st, the Army formally charged Jeffery MacDonald with 3 counts of murder. That same day, Jeffery penned a letter to Colette's mother and stepfather professing his innocence, emphasising the Army would never admit their error and speculating his wife's soul may hold, quote, infinite patience and understanding of his current legal predicament. An initial Army Article 32 hearing into Jeffery's possible guilt, overseen by Colonel Warren Rock, convened on July 6, 1970. This hearing lasted until September. Jeffery's lawyer, Bernard Siegel, adopted an offensive strategy on behalf of his client at this hearing, citing numerous examples of incompetence on behalf of the Army CID, stating that they had clumsily and unprofessionally trampled all over the crime scene during their examination of the house, obliterating any traces of evidence the perpetrators may have left and losing vital pieces of evidence, including a single thread found beneath Kimberly's nail, Jeremy's pyjama trousers, 4 torn tips of rubber surgical gloves found in the master bedroom, a single layer of skin found beneath one of Colette's fingernails. He listed several examples of incompetence from the military police, responding personnel, including testimony revealing that an ambulance driver had stolen Jeffery's wallet from the living room, and a pathologist who testified to having failed to obtain the children's fingerprints for comparison at the crime scene. The first witness to testify in Jeffery's defence, responding military policeman Kenneth Micah, testified that on the way to answering Jeffery's emergency call on the night of the murders, he had observed a blonde woman with a wide-brimmed hat standing on a street corner approximately half a mile from the MacDonald home. He noted that this sighting was unusual given the late hour and the weather. He also testified that, contrary to instruction, an ambulance driver had placed the tilted flower pot upright at the crime scene. Say what? This woman does exist? And he drove past her. And he remembered it because of the weird floppy hat and the weather. And then they went in his house and stood up a flower pot. I mean, why he didn't stand the coffee table up, while he was at it. I don't know. But well. Colonel Rock also testified that he himself went to the scene of the crime and tipped the coffee table over, with it striking the side of a rocking chair and coming to rest on its edge. He also noted the fact that if no wet footprints and mud were found at the crime scene belonging to the alleged intruders, that meant the crime scene investigators had also failed to find any evidence of the large numbers of military police and civilians who also walked around the house. Oh my gosh, this is now kind of damning, isn't it? In August, Bernard, Jeffrey's lawyer, was approached by a delivery man named William Posey, who claimed the blonde woman that Jeffrey stated had attacked his family might have been a local 17-year-old drug addict and police informant named Helena. I'm just going to call her Helena, okay? According to Posey, Helena had been in the company of 2 or 3 young males in a car parked outside her apartment at approximately 4 a.m. on the morning of the murders. Posey also claimed Helena had ceased wearing her boots and floppy hat subsequent to February 17th and had dressed in black on the date of the funerals, also stating to him that she did not remember what she did on the date of the murders. Posey later relayed this information at the hearing, adding that Helena had informed him months later that she and her boyfriend could not marry until we go out and kill some more people. Helena was located and she was questioned regarding her whereabouts on February the 17th. Her answers were vague and self-contradictory. She recalled being in the company of her boyfriend, Gregory Mitchell, on the night of February the 16th and going out for a ride in the car in the early hours of the following day, driving aimlessly, but claimed to have been so far out on drugs. Basically, she's a drug addict, and she was completely out of it. So she's kind of half remembering, half like not. She couldn't say for sure whether she had been at the house or not, although witnesses had claimed Helena had admitted her involvement in the murders, with several also remembering her wearing clothing similar to that described by Jeffrey on the date in question. She was not subpoenaed to testify. Procedural irregularities regarding investigative conduct into Helena were also highlighted by Jeffrey's lawyer. Following favourable character testimony from several acquaintances and military psychiatrists, Jeffrey testified for 3 days in mid-August. Sections of his testimony contradicted what he had informed investigators on April 6, including his claim that on this occasion to have actually moved Colette's body, having found her propped up against a chair before he just sort of laid her flat on the floor. He also stated that possibly because of his surgical background, he had sort of rinsed his hands as he checked his own injuries in the bathroom before calling for help. Referencing the type B blood found in the kitchen, Jeffrey testified that he may have also washed his hands in the kitchen sink for some reason prior to making the phone call to the emergency services. Contrary to medical reports and his earlier accounts, he also claimed to have located 2 bumps on the back of his head and 2 or 3 puncture wounds to his upper left chest, other wounds to his right bicep, and approximately 10 ice pick wounds to his abdomen on February the 17th or 18th, all of which had healed without treatment and none of which required surgery. Questioned in regards to his infidelity, Jeffrey admitted he had been unfaithful on 2 occasions, but insisted Colette had not known about either affair. He claimed that their time at Fort Bragg had been the most content of their married life. Again, contradictory in my personal opinion, because if you are cheating, you're not content. So Colette may have been content because she was unaware. I can't see how he can say their marriage was, content when he was cheating. Jeffrey's testimony was followed by that of a clinical psychologist who testified as to conclusions of a series of tests he had conducted on Jeffrey. This expert testified that the test revealed an extraordinary absence of anxiety, depression, and anger in Jeffrey with regard to the loss of his family, and that his report concluded that he was, quote, able to muster massive denial or repression, end quote, to such a degree that the impact of the recent events in his life had been blunted. Furthermore, this extreme psychological response would likely see an individual convey himself as victimized and perhaps somewhat of a martyr. I'm just going to say, this dude has woke up in early hours of the morning and found his whole family massacred. Like, not just stabbed to death, massacred in the most brutal, horrific, horrible way possible. His wife, his 5-year-old and 2-year-old. Let's just pretend he's innocent here, just for a second. Then the next thing you know, you've got the investigation, you've got the accusations, you've got the army base talking about, did he do it? Oh my God, what a horrible person. And then he's arrested. Like, I think I would be in a state of kind of denial at this point. Do you know what I mean? So, I don't know. He's got a whole lot going on. If he's innocent is my point. But anyway, Colonel Rock issued a report recommending that the charges be dismissed against Jeffery MacDonald, as insufficient evidence existed to prove his guilt, adding his belief no truth existed in the charges, and the nature of the murders led him to believe that the perpetrator /S were either insane or under the influence of drugs. He also recommended that civilian authorities further investigate Helena. Later the same month, all charges were formally dismissed, although a new CID investigation tasked with finding the murderer /S was assembled in February 1971, and obviously Jeffrey still considered a suspect. In December, Jeffrey received an honourable discharge from the army and initially returned to New York City, where he briefly worked as a doctor before relocating to Long Beach, California in July 1971. In an effort to put the past behind him and distance himself from the constant reminders of his wife and daughters, he obtained employment as an emergency room physician at the St. Mary Medical Center, frequently working long hours. He also became an instructor for the UCLA Medical School and medical director of the Long Beach Grand Prix, a lecturer on the subject of recognition and treatment of child abuse, and a participant in the development of a national training program to do with the heart and resuscitating. Jeffrey lived in a $350,000 Huntington Beach condominium apartment, and is known to have lived a promiscuous lifestyle prior to forming a long-term relationship with a 22-year-old air stewardess named Candy Kramer in the late 1970s. I thought he was going, I don't know how old he is at this point, but he's definitely not in his 20s, is he? In the years immediately following the dismissal of the murder charges, Jeffrey received an abundance of emotional and public support. He also wrote letters to several magazines and newspapers detailing his willingness to further publicise the background and the legal things in the case, like pulling them apart, basically. Now, within days of the dismissal, Jeffrey began granting press interviews and media appearances, and most notably on December the 15th in 1970, on an episode of the Dick Cavett Show, during which he appeared flippant as he complained about the army investigation and their focus on him as a suspect. On this occasion, he claimed to have sustained 23 wounds, some of which he claimed were potentially fatal. Jeffrey's stepfather-in-law, Alfred, had initially believed in his stepson in his stepson's innocence. Both he and Colette's mother, Mildred, had testified in support of Jeffrey during the Army's hearing, informing the press, quote, "My wife and I feel very strongly about Captain MacDonald's innocence. After all, it was our daughter and 2 grandchildren who were butchered." End quote. However, by November 1970, Alfred had grown suspicious of Jeffrey's repeated reluctance to provide him with a copy of the 2,000-page transcript of that hearing. In an apparent effort to discourage Alfred's efforts to obtain a copy of this transcript in pursuit of the killers, Jeffrey told Alfred that he and some army colleagues had actually tracked down, tortured and eventually murdered one of the 4 alleged murderers. Alfred's suspicion greatly increased following Jeffrey's casual, dismissive demeanour on the TV show, just days after he had himself had to hand-delivered 500 copies of an 11-page letter to members of Congress requesting a mandated re-investigation of the murders, and he and his wife publicly turned against Jeffrey. Alfred successfully obtained a copy of the transcript from the army in February 1971. He repeatedly studied the document, realizing Jeffrey's claims were inconsistent with the physical facts, and concluding his account that nothing more than a tissue of lies that repeatedly contradicted the known facts of the case. Can I just say for a second, this is Mildred is Colette's mum, and Alfred is her stepdad. He is now reading a transcript detailing their own daughter's murder, but not only their daughter, but their 2 very, very small grandchildren too. Oh my gosh, I don't know if I could be that brave. One example was Jeffrey's assertion that he had sustained life-threatening injuries, including 10 ice pick wounds during the alleged physical assault at the hands of his assailants. Alfred had met Jeffrey in the hospital less than 18 hours after the attack, and had observed him sitting up in bed, eating a meal with very little bandaging or any other medical dressing on his body. An examination of hospital records confirmed Jeffrey had received no such wounds. Alfred also discovered that within weeks of the murders of his family, Jeffrey had begun dating a young woman employed at Fort Bragg. He and his wife also later discovered that by 1969 he had rekindled his relationship with Penny Wells. Oh my gosh. This dude. So I don't know if you remember, a quick recap. He was dating Colette, then Colette broke up with him. This is all at school, or college, 8th grade, 9th grade. I'm not sure how old that is, but anyway, when Colette broke up with him, he dated Penny Wells, and now here he is dating her yet again. Like, has he not met new people? Oh my gosh. With the cooperation of a colonel and other army investigators, Alfred visited the crime scene. Oh my gosh. He visited the crime scene for several hours in order to compare the physical evidence against Jeffrey's testimony in March 1971. He's like stepping into solving his own daughter's and grandchildren's murder. Oh my gosh, he's like determined to find out if the husband really did do it. That kind of persona. This personal assessment ultimately convinced Alfred of Jeffrey's guilt, and he resolved to devote his life to pursuing all legal avenues to bring him to justice. As the army's investigation was completed, the only way Alfred could bring Jeffrey to trial was via a citizen's complaint filed through the United States Department of Justice. He filed it in early 1972. However, because the murders had occurred while Jeffrey was serving in the army and he had since been discharged, the citizen's complaint was declared moot. The FBI refused to take on the case. Oh, Alfred, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Between 1972 and 1974, the case remained trapped in limbo in the Department of Justice as legal issues were raised and debated over whether sufficient evidence and probable cause existed for indictment and prosecution. On April the 30th, 1974, Mildred, Alfred, their attorney, Richard Kahn, and the CID agent Peter Kearns presented a citizen's complaint against Jeffery MacDonald to U.S. Chief District Court Judge, I'm just going to call him Butler, requesting the convening of a grand jury to indict Jeffery MacDonald for the murders. The following month, Justice Department Attorney Victor ruled the case worthy of prosecution. The mum and the stepdad, if it was not for their persistence, if it was not for their sheer devotion, would not have come this far. Okay, so on August 12, 1974, a grand jury convened before U.S. District Judge Franklin Dupree in North Carolina to hear the legal proceedings. 75 witnesses were called to testify. Jeffrey was the first individual to testify at this hearing. His testimony lasted 5 days, during which he conceded that although he had publicly resolved to pursue all legal avenues following the 1970 dismissal of the murder charges against him and to hire investigators, he had failed to do so. Nonetheless, he was adamant he had made his own efforts to identify the perpetrators and locate Helena. He also claimed the numerous fabrications he had provided to the Collette's family, to the sections of the media in intervening years, were to placate his in-laws, and that he had received more stab and puncture wounds to his body than recorded in contemporary medical records, which he blamed on malpractice. When asked by Victor if he would submit to either a polygraph or a sodium test to verify his version of events, Jeffrey read a statement prepared by his attorneys denying their request. Other witnesses to testify included surgeons on duty at Womack Hospital who had examined Jeffrey and who testified that aside from his punctured lung, Jeffrey was not in any great danger medically, and that he had a superficial stab wound to his upper left arm and abdomen. Jeffrey had no other stab wounds to his body. A reporter who covered the Army hearing and who interviewed Jeffrey after the charges were dropped also stated that in his experience, individuals under the influence of LSD seldom become violent, and that by contrast, those who consume amphetamines frequently do. On December 12th, a former chief of psychiatry who had also testified at the Army hearing, Bruce Bailey, he testified, and he stated that when discussing his family and the events surrounding their deaths with him, Jeffrey would become emotional, become tearful, but recovered quickly. Bailey also testified he found Jeffrey to be a controlling individual who was extremely dependent on what others might think of him, and that he would often launch into a verbal tirade to allow his deep-seated emotions to become expressed by other means. When questioned as to whether Jeffrey suffered from a mental disorder, Bailey said, no, he does not. Although he could not discount the possibility of him murdering members of his family in a situation of extreme stress. This testimony was followed by a Philadelphia-based psychologist conceded that had Jeffrey committed such an act of violence, he would successfully completely block the episode from his mind. The chief of the FBI's crime lab chemistry section then testified the pajama top placed over Colette's body had been heavily bloodstained before the garment was torn, and that contrary to Jeffrey's claims, a lack of tearing at the edges of these holes proved that all 48 holes within this item of clothing had been inflicted while the garment was stationary rather than in motion. So he was not wearing it when he was attacked, is what he's saying there. He also testified all the cuts within the garment other than the pajama top had been inflicted with an old hickory kitchen knife found outside the family home, and not the paring knife that he claimed to have removed from Colette's body. That the majority of this blood had belonged to Colette, and her blood had been transferred onto the garment on at least 4 locations prior to the garment being torn. Furthermore, the club used to bludgeon Colette and Kimberly, which Jeffrey had denied having any knowledge of, had also been sawed from one of the mattress slats in Kimberly's bedroom and a single hair found in Colette's right palm had been sourced from her own body and not a blonde-haired intruder. Jeffrey was called back to testify before the grand jury on January the 21st in 1975. On this occasion, he was markedly arrogant and sarcastic when questioned with regards to issues such as infidelity or the prosecution's illusion of forensic contradictions between his version of the events and their physical evidence. On one occasion, shouting, quote, "I have no idea, I don't even know what crap you're trying to feed me," end quote, in response to a question as to how his blood and Colette's blood had transferred onto a sheet taken from Kristen's bedroom into the master bedroom. He also refused to discuss the results of a private polygraph test to which he had consented to in 1970, the results of which had been given to his lawyer Bernard, indicating that he would have to speak with his attorney on the matter before consenting to this line of inquiry. Following a brief recess, Jeffrey read a statement prepared by his attorneys, denying the prosecution's request to discuss the results of his 1970 polygraph examination, contending that Victor had violated attorney-client privilege. There's no end to this, is there? He then read his own statement to the jury, claiming 5 long years have passed since the murder of his family and his efforts to start life afresh, and that the questions posed by the prosecutors were ones he had to live with for 5 years. On January 24, 1975, the grand jury formally indicted Jeffery MacDonald on 3 counts of murder. Within the hour, he was arrested in California. On January 31st, he was freed upon a $100,000 bail raised by friends and colleagues, pending deposition of the charges, although he was arraigned on May 23rd and pleaded not guilty to the murders on this date. On July 29th, Judge Dupree denied the double jeopardy and speedy trial arguments successfully filed by his attorneys and allowed the proposed trial date of August 18th, 1975 to stand. The panel of this court ordered the indictment dismissed on the grounds of the defendant's right to a speedy trial. Jeffrey himself later claimed to weep tears of relief rather than tears of joy upon hearing this news, and later went back to a big celebration that this ordeal was now over. The government appealed to the United States Supreme Court, which ruled on May 1st, 1978, that the Fourth Circuit erred in dismissing the indictment for a speedy trial violation before the case had been tried. In response to this decision, Alfred informed the press that he and his wife welcomed the developments, stating, quote, "It's been a tremendous personal pressure to have someone running around that you are convinced killed your daughter and grandchildren," end quote. On October the 27th, the Fourth Circuit of Appeals rejected Jeffrey's double jeopardy arguments. So basically, they're arguing back and forth because there is a double jeopardy law. You can't be tried for the same crime twice. However, he hasn't been tried in civilian court. Maybe that's what the difference is. Whereas if I was tried for a crime, I can't then be tried again for the same crime because I'm a civilian, right? So I don't have the army thing behind me. I think that's where they kind of found the loophole, if you like. But yay, we're going to trial. Alfred and Mildred, oh my gosh, must be delighted after all of this. The constant, no we're not, yes we are, no we're not, yes we are. It must be so difficult. Okay, so the trial. Jeffery MacDonald was brought to trial on July the 16th in 1979. I mean, this is what, 9 years later, I think. Charged with 3 counts of murder, he was tried in North Carolina before Judge Dupree. He pleaded not guilty to the charges, and Jeffrey was defended by Bernard Siegel again, Siegel and Wade Smith. Now, James Blackburn and Brian Murtaugh prosecuted the case. Initial jury selection began and would continue for 3 days. Although Jeffrey's lawyers had been confident of an acquittal, there were successive rulings against the defence. The first such ruling was Judge Dupree's refusal to admit into evidence a 1979 psychiatric evaluation of Jeffrey, which suggested that an individual of his personality and mindset was highly unlikely to be capable of killing his family. That does seem a little bit suspicious. Dupree justified this refusal by stating that as MacDonald's attorneys had not entered an insanity plea for their client, he did not wish for the trial to be hindered by opinionated and contradictory psychiatric testimony from prosecution and defence witnesses. A further defence setback was the judge's ruling against, or as evidence. They didn't want the actual pyjama top in there. No. On the first day of the trial, Judge Dupree allowed the prosecution to admit into evidence the 1970 copy of Esquire magazine found in the MacDonald house, part of which contained the lengthy article relating to the Manson family murders. However, Dupree also refused the prosecution's request to allow any sections of the Army hearing transcripts to be produced as evidence, ruling that the current trial was a civilian trial and that was an army trial. So, like I said, 2 different trials. But he's saying, no, you can't use that as evidence. You're not having any of that. No. And of course that suggested that Jeffrey had murdered his whole family in a drug-induced rage. This evidence was also opinionated, not fact-based. So the judge said, no, you're not having that either. In his opening statement to the jury, delivered on July the 19th, James Blackburn outlined the burden of proof the prosecution faced in proving Jeffery MacDonald's guilt, that the prosecution intended to meet this burden, and the murders had been committed with malice aforethought. Blackburn then outlined the prosecution's intention to outline both physical and circumstantial evidence indicating his guilt, and to introduce numerous witnesses, imploring the jurors to listen to the evidence that comes from the witness stand, examine the evidence as it is shown to you, and reach your own conclusion. He finished his opening statement by saying to the jurors, quote, "Basically, we believe that the physical evidence points to the fact, unfortunately, one person, not two, not three, not four, not more, killed Colette, Kimberly and Kristen, and that person is the defendant." End quote. Wade Smith then argued on behalf of the defence. Smith referenced the events of the February 1970 Army investigation and subsequent dismissal of all charges, repeatedly emphasising the case had occurred over 9 years ago, my math was correct, and that in the intervening years, Jeff had done his utmost to rebuild his life, while others would not allow him to forget his painful past. Their client had now been brought to trial to face the charges of murdering his wife and children. Smith emphasised to the jurors their ability to relieve their client of all his ongoing ordeal by acquitting him of all charges. One of the chief prosecution witnesses to testify was Paul Stumbar, whom the prosecution summoned to testify on August 7th. Paul demonstrated to the jurors how Jeffrey's pyjama top had been pierced by 48 small, smooth and cylindrical ice pick holes after the garment had been placed on top of his wife's chest. Paul contended that in order for the holes to have been smooth and devoid of fraying or tearing, the garment would have remained stationary, an extremely unlikely occurrence if, as Jeffrey contended, he had wrapped it around his hands to defend himself from blows from an attacker wielding an ice pick or club. Furthermore, Paul demonstrated that by folding the garment in the same manner depicted in the crime scene photographs, all 48 holes could have been made by 21 thrusts of an ice pick through the garment and in an identical pattern, implying Colette had been repeatedly stabbed through the pyjama top while the garment was laying on her body. Because he said he took it off to cover her, didn't he? So, lie. Although Bernard, Jeffrey's lawyer, subjected Paul to a harsh cross-examination, repeatedly raising his voice as he challenged Paul's credentials and forensic methods, Paul remained steadfast in his conclusions. A further piece of damning evidence against Jeffrey was an audio tape made on April 6, 1970, interviewed by military investigators, which was played in the courtroom immediately after the jurors had returned from visiting the still intact crime scene. My gosh, they kept that crime scene for 9 years, and then, wow. The jury heard Jeffrey's matter-of-fact, indifferent account of the murders. They heard him become angry, defensive and emotional in response to the suggestions by the investigators that he had committed the murders. He asked the investigators why would they think he, who had a beautiful family and everything going for him, could have murdered his family in cold blood for no reason. The jury also heard investigators later confront him with their knowledge of his extramarital affair, plural, to which Jeffrey murmured, "Oh, you guys are more thorough than I thought." Despite earlier rulings against the defense counsel, the prosecution also hampered by the lack of an obvious motive for Jeffrey to have committed the murders. He had no history of violence or domestic abuse against his wife or children. The defense also argued the crime scene was hopelessly compromised during the investigation and potential evidence was either destroyed, lost, or remained uncollected. Jeffrey's defense attorneys also called for several favourable character witnesses, plus a forensic expert named James Thornton, to stand. Thornton attempted to rebut Paul's contention of the pyjama top that it was stationary on Colette's chest rather than wrapped around Jeffrey's wrists as he warded off blows, stating that he had attempted to stab a pyjama top wrapped around a ham with an ice pick as an assistant moved the item back and forth, resulting in perfectly cylindrical holes with no tearing around the edges of the garment. Okay then. It kind of reminds me of the OJ thing with the glove. Following Thornton's testimony, prosecutors staged an impromptu reenactment of the alleged attack on Jeffrey. He wrapped a pyjama top of the same material around his hand and attempted to fend off a series of blows that Blackburn attempted to inflict on him with the ice pick used in the murders. The resulting ice pick holes in the pyjama top were jagged and elongated, not smoothly cylindrical like the ones within the garment recovered upon Colette's body. Furthermore, he received a small wound on his right arm. Jeffrey had received no defensive wounds on his arms or hands consistent with a struggle. In addition, aside from a small smear of blood discovered upon the Esquire magazine and a single speck of blood upon Jeffrey's glasses, no other traces of blood were recovered from the room in which Jeffrey claimed to have fought for his life. Now, do you remember Helena, the girl with the blonde hair and the floppy hat? The drug addict. She did exist. And yeah. One of the final defense witnesses that he subpoenaed to testify on Jeffrey's behalf, on his team, was Helena, intent on extracting a confession from her that she had been one of the intruders that Jeffrey claimed had entered his house, murdering his family and attacked him. Bernard talked to Helena in private for over 2 hours, attempting to persuade her to confess to end Jeffrey's years of suffering unjustly. Also promising her immunity from prosecution due to the expiration of the statute of limitations. Helena repeatedly informed Bernard she was unable to help him, so she also denied ever having seen Jeffrey and refused to testify to acts that she was adamant she did not commit. Under oath, Helena denied any culpability in murders and any knowledge of who may have committed the acts. Helena was insistent that she was unable to recall her whereabouts on the date of the murders. She emphasized her extensive drug use in 1970 and the intervening years, adding that the night of February the 16th, 17th, 1970 was by no means the first or last in which she was unable to recall her whereabouts. Following this testimony, both teams alternatively argued before Judge Dupree for the dismissal or introduction of testimony from several witnesses to whom Helena had earlier allegedly confessed. On August the 20th, Dupree refused the introduction of this testimony, citing legal trustworthiness requisites and stating that the introduction of these witnesses would add no further value to the proceedings than what they had experienced from Helena's own testimony. The final witness to testify on behalf of the defence was, how us true crime people go, don't do it. Yep, it was Jeffrey, who testified on his own behalf on August 23rd and 24th. Jeffrey was first questioned by Bernard, who sought to humanise his client in the eyes of the jury. He began questioning by asking him about his family. Jeffrey described each member of his family and their individual personalities, stating the family shared almost everything. We were all friends. Colette and I shared the children growing up. We shared our life experiences. He also claimed the reason he had never remarried was the fact that he was unable to forget his wife and children, whom he thought about daily. Bernard then asked Jeffrey to recount his family background, his career at Fort Bragg, and his family's general lifestyle in February 1970. He then produced several family photographs and artifacts, asking Jeffrey to describe each item or the circumstances surrounding each photograph and to identify the individual in each image. Jeffrey then recounted his life in the years since the death of his family, describing his decisions to relocate to California as an effort to distance himself from well-wishers, and insisting the reason he worked up to 80 hours a week was that it was easier than sitting and thinking about his family. The following day, James Blackburn cross-examined Jeffrey. He outlined every piece of physical and circumstantial evidence recovered at the crime scene, which contradicted Jeffrey's own accounts of, quote, the assailants attacking him and murdering his family, and instead indicated his own guilt. Blackburn typically began each question with a statement to the effect of, Dr. MacDonald, should the jury find from the evidence, blah, 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 blah. Jeffrey was unable to offer any plausible explanation for these discrepancies. For example, he was unable to explain how the piece of lumber used as a weapon came from a mattress slapped on Kimberly's bed, but claimed there, quote, may have been some wood in the utility room. Later adding his insistence the club which had struck him across the head was sort of smooth and may have been a baseball bat as opposed to a wooden instrument. He also claimed the earlier testimony of the Army investigators pertaining to his questioning on April the 6th, 1970 was unreliable due to the poor conduct of the investigators, and the several weeks had lapsed between the murders and his formal questioning. When questioning Jeffrey in regard to various discrepancies in his accounts of his movements, the injuries he sustained, and the positioning of his pyjama jacket upon his body throughout the night of the murders, and with regards to the tearing and fibre evidence sourcing from the garment, Blackburn succeeded in highlighting several discrepancies in Jeffrey's accounts by comparison to previous interview transcripts and his current claims, and the contradictions of this testimony with forensic evidence. In response, Bernard repeatedly raised objections to this line of questioning, claiming the discrepancies were misleading. His objections were frequently overruled. Following a brief recess, Blackburn resumed his cross-examination. On this occasion, he illustrated instances of Jeffrey's adjusting his testimony regarding having moved his wife's body after learning fibres from his pyjama top were found beneath her body. On August 28, 1979, both counsels delivered their closing arguments before the jury. James argued first, beginning by contrasting the injuries inflicted upon Colette, Kimberly and Kristen with those suffered by Jeffrey. He then outlined the medical testimony which listed the sole serious injury Jeffrey had sustained was a pneumothorax wound to his chest, stating that even if the prosecution conceded the wound was potentially life-threatening, the wound was the sole serious injury he had sustained, referencing the life-death struggle Jeffrey claimed to have engaged in with the alleged intruders. Blackburn stated the evidence indicated a struggle had occurred in the MacDonald home, but this struggle was between only one white male and one white female. The white female was Colette and the white male was her husband. Wow. Blackburn then poured scorn on the character witnesses who had earlier testified Jeffrey had been a good husband and father, then returned to the evidence stating, quote, If we convince you by the evidence he did it, we don't have to show you he is the sort of person that could have done it. End quote. He then closed his initial argument by stating, quote, I can only tell you from the physical evidence that things do not lie, but I suggest that people can and do. End quote. The following day, Bernard and Wade Smith delivered their closing arguments on behalf of the defence. Bernard focused much of his closing argument upon the campaign of persecution his client had been subjected to by the legal system for almost a decade in an attempt to frame him for the murder of his family, describing the prosecution case as a house built on sand. Portraying Jeffrey as a loving husband and father, Bernard then emphasised Jeffrey's insistence from the outset that 4 intruders had been responsible for the murders. He spoke for over 3 hours, using virtually all of the defence's allotted time. Oh my gosh. This guy's gone on and on and on and used all of his time up, right? So the prosecution, Blackburn, agreed to forfeit 10 minutes of their own rebuttal time to allow Smith to make an argument to the jury. They were like, dude, go for it, because we know he's going away. Have 10 minutes. You're good. Following a brief recess, Smith appealed to the jurors to question the lack of an obvious motive for Jeffrey to have committed the murders. He referenced the family photographs of Jeffrey enjoying the company of his wife and children in the years and even weeks before their deaths, stating it makes no sense. There was no motive. He then appealed to the jurors to give Jeffrey the peace he had sought for almost a decade. In his rebuttal argument, now 10 minutes short, James referenced Smith's earlier observation regarding the unbelievability of a successful doctor murdering his family, but contended the events of February the 17th, 1970 occurred because events overtook themselves too fast. Everything else, ladies and gentlemen, we say in that crime scene flowed from that moment. He then referred once again to the physical evidence, stating that the evidence unequivocally illustrated the chain of events which occurred and which only pointed to Jeffrey's guilt. Blackburn closed his rebuttal argument by stating that, although the prosecution was convinced that Jeffrey was guilty, they only wished he was not, given the final moments of the victims and, quote, who it was that was going to make them die, end quote, adding that the defendant would never have peace. In the final address to the jury, Judge Dupree informed the panel they had three choices to choose from: to find him not guilty, to find him guilty of first-degree murder, or guilty of second-degree murder in each case. Shortly after 4 p.m. on August the 29th, 1979, the jury, having deliberated for 6.5 hours, announced they had reached their verdict. Jeffery MacDonald was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder in the death of Kristen and 2 counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of Colette and Kimberly. 4 jurors wept as they announced their verdicts, and Jeffrey's mother rushed out of the courtroom. Jeffrey himself displayed no emotion. Judge Dupree imposed a life sentence for each of the murders to be served consecutively. Bail was revoked and MacDonald was temporarily transferred to a Butner County jail prior to his permanent transfer to the Federal Correctional Institution in Terminal Island, California. Immediately following the verdict, Alfred telephoned the family lawyer. Alfred thanked the lawyer for his exhaustive efforts over the years, stating, his name is Richard, but they're obviously very close. He, quote, "Hi Dick, I just got what I wanted. I'm tearing up here. 3 life sentences. Thanks for everything. We couldn't have done it without your help." They also informed the press that this was something that had to be done. Now we can rest in peace. Jeffrey appealed Dupree's bail ruling, requesting that bail be granted pending the outcome of his appeal. This application was rejected on September 7th. A further appeal to be freed on bail was rejected by the Court of Appeals on November 20th. He did go on to appeal. I'm not gonna continue with all of that legal speak. He did on July 29th, 1980, he would later announce his engagement to his fiancée, Randy D. Marquis, in March 1982. Dude, you're never coming out of prison. 6 months later, on December the 18th, yeah, they no, denied. Jeffrey again appealed his decision, contending his conviction should be overturned due to suppressed evidence. Denied. A further appeal was argued before the Fourth Circuit. What for this time? Which he claimed. The appeal contended that Judge Dupree permitted this evidence. The jurors would have learned all. Oh, okay. So now they're arguing. Pre-trial, they were arguing about what's in, what's out. And now post-trial, they're arguing, well, you should have let that in. Yeah, no. The court ruled against awarding a new trial on June the 2nd, stating that Judge Dupree acted correctly, and yeah, he refused it because it wasn't an insanity trial. They're pulling up every excuse they can to try and get him out of prison. September 2nd, 1997, he posted something else. It's something to do with the DNA testing. March 2006 announced the results of this DNA testing, that neither Stockley or Matchell. Okay, so Helena, the lady in the floppy hat, her DNA was never found at the home. Neither was that of her boyfriend. They did not commit the murders. Furthermore, a single hair found within Colette's left palm was cited by Jeffrey as to belonging to one of the intruders, but it was actually Colette's own hair that was found. In September 2012, it just goes on. April 2021, Jeffrey was denied a request for compassionate release upon the grounds of his ailing health, with Judge Terence Boyle citing the compassionate release law applies to only individuals whose crimes occurred on or after November 1987. A further appeal against this ruling was dismissed by the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit on September the 16th, 2021. Okay, shortly after Jeffrey's initial release from prison in August 1980, his supporters hired a retired FBI agent and private investigator named Ted Grunson to assist in overturning his conviction. Grunson contacted Helena, who on this occasion confessed that she and 5 members of what she described as a drug cult had developed a deep grudge against Jeffrey MacDonald, as he had refused to treat heroin and opium addicted patients. Accordingly, she and other members of this group had plotted revenge against MacDonald, intending specifically to murder his family but leave him alive. According to Helena, she had telephoned the MacDonald residence late in the evening of February the 16th to determine all the members of the family were present in the house. Colette answered and stated a babysitter would be there in the early evening, but that after she had left, all the family would be present and alone. The group had then drove to the MacDonald residence. She and 4 others entered the house and confronted Jeffrey, intent on him signing a prescription a certain thing for a prescription. Although the situation quickly deteriorated, with Jeffrey attempting to fight his attackers before quickly lapsing into unconsciousness. Helena alleged she then ran to the master bedroom to find "Death to all pigs" or something like that, scrawled up on the headboard, and two of her friends were bludgeoning Colette on the bed as her child lay asleep next to her. Oh my gosh. So she was in the bed, as she always was, right? She always was. Helena was adamant that she worn a beige floppy hat on the evening in question. Helena had submitted to a polygraph test in April 1971, with the military examiner stating, "It is concluded that Helena is convinced in her own mind that she knows the identity of those persons who killed Colette Kimberly and Christy MacDonald. It is further concluded that Helena is convinced in her own mind that she was physically present when 3 members of the MacDonald family were killed. No abnormal psychological responses were noted in the polygraph tracings. However, due to Helena's admitted confused state of mind and her excessive drug use during and immediately following the homicides in question, a conclusion cannot be reached as to whether she in fact knows who perpetrated the homicides or whether she in fact was present at the crime scene at the time of the murders. On April the 16th, 2007, Jeffrey's attorneys filed an affidavit on behalf of Helena's mother, who is also named Helena, who stated that her daughter had twice confessed to her that she was present in the MacDonald household on the evening of the murders and that her daughter was afraid of the prosecutors. Jeffrey requested to expand this then outstanding appeal to include this affidavit alongside all the evidence amassed at the trial. The developments, which he claimed had been subsequently discovered, including the 2006 results of DNA testing and statements of individuals of whom Helena had made these confessions. This appeal also alleged that the trial statements of prosecutor James Blackburn should be considered unreliable, as he had been convicted of fraud, forgery and embezzlement and subsequently disbarred in 1993. Oh, James, you did such a good job as well. Oh my gosh. In his power of words, I mean. Jeffrey's motions regarding DNA results and the affidavit of Helena's mother were denied. The denial of these 2 motions was based on jurisdictional issues. I can't speak. Specifically that Jeffrey had not obtained the required pre-filing authorization from the circuit court for these motions. He just done it anyway, basically. Nonetheless, the 4th Circuit of Appeals granted Jeffrey's motion for a successive petition and remanded the matter back to the district court. He kind of has a point. If that conversation really did happen, it really is a whodunit, because I'm convinced he did, but then Helena is constantly saying, I was there, it's true, you know, but it doesn't align with the physical evidence either. But then it won't, will it? Because they trampled all over the crime scene. This is really, really baffling, and obviously it's very aged, and we didn't have the technology advances that we have today. You could walk into the crime scene now and just collect evidence, take it to the lab, and, you know, it kind of tells the story, but this is a very different time. But yeah, on January 12, 2006, Jeffrey was granted leave to file a further appeal based on a November 2005 affidavit of retired Deputy States Marshal Jim Britt, who had served in this role during the trial. Britt stated that he had overheard Helena admit to a prosecutor, James Blackburn, that she actually had been present at the MacDonald household at the time of the murders, and that Blackburn had threatened her with prosecution if she testified as a defence witness. Well, that's not good. That's not good. But is he telling the truth? I don't see why he would lie. And why didn't he say so at the time? See, it's also very suspicious. Everyone is acting shady. No one is telling the truth. Oh my gosh. It's a head scratcher, right? It's a head scratcher. And I've been here, what, 2 hours now? Roundabout. Just guessing at that point. Helena had earlier met with the defence counsel prior to this alleged meeting with Blackburn and informed them she had no memory of her whereabouts on the night in question, but was she scared now that she was going to go to jail because of Blackburn? Who knows? Who knows what the truth is? In November 2008, Judge James Carroll Fox denied this appeal. This denial was based on the merits of the claim, specifically that Helena had made many contradictory statements regarding her participation, or lack thereof, in the murders. Her claims were unreliable. And yes, that's what I just kind of said. She was there 1 minute, she wasn't the next. But was she being threatened with prosecution if she did speak out? Was she? I mean, she did say it numerous times. She did say it numerous times. And that delivery driver from the very beginning saw her, or she told him that she was there, and she often wore a floppy hat and whatnot, but she never did ever again after that. And the ambulance driver saw her, or someone resembling her in a floppy hat, on the way to what would essentially be the crime scene. So, I don't know. I don't know. Subsequent to this November 2008 decision, a government motion to modify the decision to negate Britt's claims was denied. Yep. They're just going to keep denying that. Jeffrey faced several legal obstacles in his efforts to incorporate a motion relating to the earlier results. He's just clinging on to everything. Okay, so yeah, he's still in jail, I do believe. An evidentiary hearing relating to the claims that within the Britt affidavit, the hair fibre evidence and future testimony pertaining to Helena's verbal confessions was held in September 2012. However, in July 2014, Judge Fox ruled against the MacDonald's appeal upholding his conviction. He's trying to get out of jail. In June 1979, Jeffrey invited an author to write a book about his case. Initially unsure of Jeffrey's guilt or innocence, he agreed to his request and was given full access to Jeffrey, his defence team, during the upcoming trial. The book that he wrote relating to the murders, its Fatal Vision, portraying Jeffrey as a narcissistic sociopath. There you go. This is someone who spent, wow, okay. He's a narcissistic sociopath who was guilty of murdering his family and who believed in his ongoing capabilities to deceive both legal personnel and personal acquaintances. Oh wow, that's a bit damning. I think he invited him in to help him, thinking that he would, like, get his story out there. Did he do it? Didn't he do it? That's what we're talking about here today. But instead he deemed him as a narcissistic sociopath. Oh wow. Fatal Vision also alleges a possible motive for the killings, as Jeffrey was regularly taking the amphetamine, I don't even know what that is, escatrol, I'm not very good at pronouncing things, in an effort to lose weight via a weight control program for his Green Beret unit. He suggests that Jeffrey may have murdered his family in a spur of the moment fit of psychotic rage as a result of his frequent consumption of the amphetamines. Furthermore, the book emphasises the fact that MacDonald worked extremely long hours in several medical employment roles in 1969 and 1970, and his extensive social and family commitments resulted in him suffering from an increasing lack of sleep. Okay, I think I'm going to go with the amphetamines more than lack of sleep. I know that does drive you crazy. I end up, I don't go this crazy, not by any means, but I can be up 3 days straight, and at the end of it, I'm going doolally. So I get that, I do, but I would never murder my own family, however lack of sleep I have, Jeffrey had expected his book to profess his innocence and the ongoing miscarriage of justice to which he has been subjected. And then in 1987, he sued the author for fraud, claiming that the author had agreed to hear his innermost thoughts in order to write a positive account of his ongoing fight for justice for himself and his family, but his claims of innocence, after he had already reached a conclusion of his guilt, in order that he, Jeffrey, continue cooperating with him on the project. The lawsuit resulted in a mistrial on August the 21st, 1987. The two later settled out of court for $325,000. Although Alfred and Milford subsequently filed their own countersuit against Jeffrey, citing an inheritance clause, resulting in Jeffrey receiving only $50,000. Well done, Arthur. Alfred is just there going, no mate, you're not having it, no. So, he's like a little superhero. He was the one that got him convicted. He was the one that stopped him from getting, what would that be? 225, I think my maths is correct, $225,000. He only got 50 of it, so yay. Okay. Colette, Kimberly and Kristen were laid to rest side by side in Washington Memorial Park in Suffolk County, Long Island, on February the 23rd, 1970. Each grave was initially inscribed with the surnames MacDonald, although the gravestones were later changed to Colette's maiden name of Stevenson. Jeffrey is currently serving his life sentence at a federal prison in Cumberland, Maryland, and continues to maintain his innocence. Several individuals do believe his claims of innocence, and he remains determined to clear his name. In 2017, Jeffrey stated, quote, "I am not going to get out saying a falsehood to the parole commission in order for them to give me a break. If it takes me saying I killed my family to get the parole commission to get me out of here and go home, I am never going home." His lawyers have repeatedly used the Freedom of Information Act to locate any evidence not presented by either counsel at his 1979 trial. They just keep fighting. And sadly, I don't think he's getting out of prison. Whether he did it, whether these Helena's gang came in and did do it, I don't know. This is a proper head scratcher. He's claiming that an unidentified fingerprint and fibre evidence uncovered inside his home has never been matched to any individual. It possibly could have been a police officer. I'm sorry, Jeffrey, but they trampled all over that crime scene. It could have been anybody. You're clinging on to, yeah, I mean, well, he did become eligible for parole in 1991, but he did not apply for parole. At the urging of his second wife, he went on to get married. I didn't read about that, but there you go, he did get married. I have no interest. She married someone who potentially murdered his whole family. Because, you know, he's been convicted of it. But at the urging of his second wife and his attorneys, he applied for a May 2005 parole hearing. Denied. His next potential parole hearing was in May 2020, although it's not known whether he actually applied or not. Gregory Mitchell, that was Helena's husband. Helena's boyfriend. He was accused of murdering Colette. He died on June the 2nd in 1982 at the age of 31. He was a heavy narcotics user. So, yeah, linked to narcotic use. Prior to his death, he allegedly confessed to multiple people at his involvement in the murders, although he had previously passed a polygraph test in 1971, and the CID cleared him of any involvement. And again, drug users, I'm not stereotypically, they have the bravado, right? Oh, they've accused me of that. Don't mess with me because I did it. Could have been a passing comment, right? Helena died at the age of 30 in 1983. Her body was found inside her apartment, with her death estimated to have occurred 5 days before her body was discovered. Oh my gosh, that's so sad. Her autopsy indicated she died of pneumonia and obviously narcotic use. In the years prior to her death, Helena had undergone several years of treatment for drug addiction and psychiatric care. Oh my gosh. It's also very sad when, she was 30. Oh my gosh. When they get to rock bottom and then they seek help. and pass away. It's always so very sad. On December the 17th, 1995, Judge Franklin Dupree died at the age of 82 following a short illness. Bernard Segal, Jeffrey's lead defense attorney, died in California in 2011. James Blackburn, a lead prosecutor in the 1979 trial, later admitted that between 1990 and 1991 he had forged several court documents unrelated to the MacDonald case, and illegally wired money from his law firm's bank account. In 1993, Blackburn pleaded guilty to fraud, embezzlement and forgery and obstruction of justice. He was disbarred and served 3.5 months in jail. Colette's mother and stepfather, Mildred and Alfred, both died in 1994. Mildred in January and Alfred in October. Alfred had initially believed Jeffrey's testimony, and he was a very vocal supporter of his son-in-law, but drastically changed his opinion, as we know. I covered that, but it's quite ironic that he was so vocally supportive of Jeffrey in the beginning and then became his fiercest nemesis, and it's because of Alfred and his perseverance and his dedication to get justice for his stepdaughter and daughter. I don't know how close they were, obviously very, but he did it. He got justice. Or did he get the wrong man convicted? You decide. You are you are the judge and the jury on this one, because this is a head scratcher. Mildred, this is very, very sad. Mildred had welcomed a 1971 diagnosis of breast cancer, writing in her diary that cancer would help her, quote, desire to just die. Following the murders of her daughter and her grandchildren, but her husband's steadfast determination to see Jeffrey brought to justice compelled her to assist him, and then she consented to radiation therapy, and obviously was around for a long time after that. So in 1984, Alfred reflected on the impact of the events made on his marriage to Colette's mother, saying that most people go through a traumatic thing like this, nowhere near as lengthy, almost always ends up in divorce, but with us, it's drawn us closer. With his own health in decline, in 1989, Alfred recorded a message on a tape recorder stating he wished the recording to be played at any future parole hearings. In this recorded message, Alfred stated, quote, "I want to be sure he serves out his sentence the way it should have been served out. I don't want him walking the streets." And even now, Alfred has passed, and even now, he's still a thorn in Jeffrey's side. That's going to be played at every parole hearing, and still, he's like a superhero, right? He's like a superhero. But there you go, you guys. Oh, wow. Wow. I covered a lot. I hope you kept up, and it wasn't too confusing. I do get lost in the legal speak of things sometimes. But yeah, oh my gosh. Where is Jeffery MacDonald now? Yep, he's still in prison. He is still in prison. My gosh. There you go. I noticed that Google now uses an AI overview. But yeah. They give you all the Jeffrey, but it was Jeffery MacDonald. Okay, there you go, my true crime fanatics. There is a complete head scratcher for you. Did he do it? Did he do it? Is the question. I don't know. I don't know. I must admit, when I saw this, I can't even remember what show it's on to help pin it down. I can't remember where it was that I saw it. I can guarantee it was probably on the Discovery Channel, and it was one of the true crime where they go through different crimes. And this came up, but the way they portrayed it made me question whether he did do it or not. But he was found guilty in a court of law. It is a bit shady. I mean, you can take the trauma of losing your whole family, then being thrown into interrogation, and things will get muddled, and things do get... I don't know. It seems a little far-fetched that there were these 5 people in the house, and, you know, it does seem a little far-fetched, and so brutally. That's the thing that I'm struggling with. It was so brutal. Like, not just on Colette, but a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. It was so very brutal. But anyway, I'm leaving it here. I have talked long enough. I definitely need a cup of tea because I did this in like 2 hours, and I need to obviously edit it and take out my coffee and insert photos and different things like that. But yeah, what do you think? A pure head scratcher. Or is it? Is it clear cut for you guys? That'd be interesting. When I go back to edit it and like listen to it back, because I kind of have to do that, maybe I'll have a clearer picture in my mind. So I might do an add-on on the end. But there you go. Thank you for keeping me company. I do appreciate it. Thank you. If you enjoy my true crime, please do, you know, give me that thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because it does help me get out there with my true crime. But yeah, what are you going to do now? Like, you have to go do something light-hearted. I don't know why I release these on a Sunday evening, because, you know, it's chill time. I mean, you don't have to listen to it on a Tuesday. You don't have to listen to it on a Sunday evening, to be fair. But, yeah. I know. Maybe I need a new hobby. No. Don't paint true crime. It's my jam. It's my jam. Yeah. Okay, I'm out of here, you guys. I need a cup of tea. And yeah, do something productive. Housework, I guess. Or don't paint some more. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. To my dome painting fanatics, I will see you tomorrow on my live, 8 PM UK time. Yeah, have a wonderful rest of your evening. Go do something fun. But don't forget to tell me, did he do it or did he not do it? In the comment section first. Okay, stay safe. I love you all. And toodaloo for now.